Welcome to Issues and Answers with your host, Diane Kinderwater. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. And now, Issues and Answers with your host, Diane Kinderwater.
Welcome to the program. I'm Diane Kinderwater, hoping 2024 is still a good year for you and your family. I'm going to ask you on this show to think back on what really has affected you and your purse over the past 25 years, especially, here's a secret, when you go to the grocery store. On the show today, we're going to talk about things in the past that have affected our lives positively, and we're going to look towards the future. And one point is about the grocery store. You may have forgotten the time where we actually used to pay taxes on our groceries. Remember those days? No longer. And what about our kids, our grandkids and their education? Remember there was a time they went to kindergarten for just a couple hours a day. It's like, why get them ready just to get on the school bus and go and just return? Remember those days? Well, that's the past we're going to talk about, but also ideas to improve all the lives of people in New Mexico. But before we do all that, I have a question for you. What do you think these things have in common? Socialite and actress from Hungary, Zsa Gabor, Hilton hotel magnate, Conrad Hilton, and the think tank, the result-oriented think tank that serves New Mexico called Think New Mexico. What do those three things have in common? We're going to tell you after this, so think ahead of what affected your life in the past, and what does Zsa Gabor, Conrad Hilton, and Think New Mexico have in common? We'll be back with the answers right after this.
You want to feel important. You want to be a part of something bigger, something that matters and can help change things.
You want to feel like you belong. We know. We felt that way too, and that's why we did something about it.
We aren't just Army National Guard soldiers.
We are normal people just like you.
And together, we can make a difference.
Take on your legacy. Visit nationalguard.com to find out more.
My guest today is the executive director and the founder of Think New Mexico, a result-oriented think tank. He's been a guest on our program in the past, and he's excited to be here, and I'm excited to have you, Fred Nathan. Thank you so much for being a part of the program in the past 25 years and in the future.
Thank you for having me again.
So I did the intro about what affected our lives in the past, and we're going to talk about that, but what affects our lives in the future. You have ideas that Think New Mexico is dealing with, but let's solve that riddle. Tell me a little bit about, of course, Think New Mexico, 25-year anniversary. Think New Mexico is 25 years old in 2024, but what does that have to do with Zsa Gabor and Conrad Hilton?
Well, we were looking for a bigger office space. We want to magnify our impact. And so we're going to hire some people, but we didn't have room. So we started to look around for more space. And this building is ideal that we just bought in May of this year.
May of 2023.
May of 2023.
A year ago, practically, okay.
Just across the street from the state capitol, built before statehood in 1910, so it's 113 years old. And it wasn't on the market. So
It was do you want to tell us the name of it?
It's called the Greer House.
Or the Greer Mansion?
Some people call it a mansion. It's really not a mansion.
Okay, Greer House.
And so I reached out on a whim to the family partnership that's owned it, and to see if they might be willing to sell it. And I think the key thing was that they used to entertain governors, legislators, Supreme Court justices. And I was able to point out that's who's on our board at Think New Mexico. We have a former governor, Gary Carruthers, a former Supreme Court Justice, Judy Nakamura, former legislator, Phelps Anderson. And I suggested we'd be good stewards of this building. And so we were able to come together on a deal. And you're right, it has an incredible storied history, including the marriage of Zsa Gabor and Conrad Hilton took place in this building many, many years ago. People don't realize that Conrad Hilton, before he was a hotel magnate, was a legislator. He was a Republican from down south. He served 2 or 3 terms, didn't really like it very much, and and the rest is history.
Well, he
went to
thought
the
I'd
hotel
go on to
business.
bigger and better things. So maybe divide, because he probably didn't own his hotel chain back as a state legislature here in New Mexico.
Right. He started out very small, very modest, and built it up. And
Wow. But I didn't know that he was one of Zsa Zsa Gabor's 8 husbands, Conrad Hilton, and they got married in the home now of Think New Mexico.
correct.
So when they sold you the home, sold you this as your office space, what did you tell them about Think New Mexico and the relationship of over 100-year history of this Greer mansion, Greer house, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Conrad Hilton, and now Fred Nathan and staff?
Yeah, we said, it's a perfect next stage for this building. And it's worked out perfectly for us because now we're able to expand and hire some other additional policy people, an economist, and we're able to rent out the first floor to a law firm, which is helping to pay for it. We also got an anonymous donation of $1 million, and we had a donation of 6 acres of land in Taos that we were able to sell for $900,000. So between all 3 of these things, we didn't have to invade our investment reserves, which really made it a very good transaction for the organization.
That was a fun history about Think New Mexico and your new office space. You needed that because you're expanding your staff. You had about 3 or 4 in 2023, but now you're hoping to expand that to 3 or 4 more people.
Correct.
To do the work, the result-oriented work. And we're going to talk about the beginnings of Think New Mexico, but I want to also tell the audience about some things that affected their lives over the past 25 years that you've been in existence. And I gave them the tip to think about the grocery store. Tell me a little bit about the grocery store.
Well, that was our second project after full day kindergarten, and it was a very regressive tax. And
Well, we used to tax food. We used to tax food at the grocery store. If you
Correct.
don't remember this.
And very regressive tax. It just didn't make sense in a state that was also at the bottom for hunger, or I should say at the top for hunger. And so we started a campaign, and I remember pointing out back then, people sometimes say that the tax code is a reflection of your values as a state. And we discovered that the taxes on horse feed, there was no tax on horse feed, but there was tax on baby food. And my oldest daughter had just been born, and this is just shameless, but I would go to speak at Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs.
You wanted to feed her horse feed?
I pointed out if she had been born a horse instead of a little girl, we wouldn't pay tax on her food, and just what's wrong with this picture. So I had a big bag of horse feed, and I had my newborn daughter that I traveled around the state with to make this point that we really need to rethink this policy of taxing groceries, but not animal feed.
Well, we want them to say Fred Nathan's kids are eating dog food. Right. Could lead to that.
Yeah.
So Think New Mexico, that's their second project, was to eliminate the tax. And I think Senator Stuart Ingle was maybe a sponsor of one of the years on this. Stuart Ingle was the leader.
Well, actually, Ramsey Gorham, we got Ramsey Gorham and Manny Aragon to sponsor the bill originally. And the idea was to, any tax increase does harm, but we wanted to make up some of the revenue, so we increased the taxes on alcohol and tobacco and took it off of food. And Manny and Ramsey were not allies, and the media loved it because, she was maybe the most conservative member, he was maybe the most liberal member of the Senate, and they had a deep personal animosity, I would say. And so anyway, we were able to get it through the Senate 34-4, and then it went over to the House, and it just kept getting, every time we'd pass it out of committee, we'd get another assignment. But so it took 3 years eventually to repeal that tax, but we finally got it off of food.
One of the things that you're most proud of as the executive director of Think New Mexico.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk about the beginnings of how it was formed, but before we do that, I do want to talk to you about full day kindergarten, because that's another flagship success that you've had, in addition to repealing the tax on food. As I said, I remember the day when I was a kid going to kindergarten. It's like, geez, all this effort for a couple hours? And the parents?
And in the rural parts of the state, we discovered kids were spending more time, as you mentioned, on the school bus than they were in the classroom. And half day was sort of a misnomer. It was like 2.5 hours. So that was our first initiative. We thought if we want to bring the state up in these national rankings, the obvious place to start was education. We wanted to start at the beginning. And the really interesting part of that whole project was when we came out with the proposal, we had a press conference and there was an article in the paper, and the speaker then, Raymond Sanchez, made a good point. He said, it's a perfectly fine idea, but how are we going to pay for it? And we hadn't really explained that. And so we went back and wrote a second report. The first report was on the need for full-day kindergarten and made all the usual arguments. The second report was on how to pay for it. And I remember it was, the cost was 1% of the general fund. And so I hired a guy named John Gasparich, who I'm sure you know, and he set—
Remarkable, I just want to say remarkable person, John Gasparich, in so many areas.
I totally agree. Worked under Democrats and Republicans as sort of
favorite. He's my favorite, actually.
Yeah, he's terrific. And I paid him all of $1,000 to sit with me for 2 weeks. I had a legal pad, and we literally went through the state budget line by line, looking for things that were non-essential or duplicative or just wasteful. And we found about 22 things, 22 different items in the budget, and said, there's a choice here. We can continue to pay for these redundant programs that don't work. So for example, in New Mexico, when you travel into the state, there are these welcome centers. And in Gallup, the welcome center was on the wrong side of the highway, and you could only access it as you were leaving. And the general idea is it was staffed by state employees. They still have them. And you stop there and they give you a map and they try to get you to elongate your stay, and they say, well, where are you going? Well, you might want to go to White Sands. But it made no sense to build it on the wrong side of the highway. I think somebody had a building that they wanted to rent. And so there were 7 state employees working there. It was about $1 million a year. And we said, well, we can continue to spend money on that, or we can invest it in full-day kindergarten. So anyway, with the help of a lot of people—
Nobody ever, well, that's a whole other show. Nobody ever pointed out that you can't get to it coming into the state, just leaving?
Nobody people just drove by it.
Oh, God. Okay, so that's an example. Thank you.
So we were able to show we could pay for this without raising taxes, which was critical for Gary Johnson, who, thanks to G. Johnson, changed his mind. The bill passed. It's very dramatic. And then Johnson had announced that he was going to veto it. But I think it was Dee Johnson who we had started talking to about it. She's been a former teacher, and she was, of course, the governor's wife, who changed his mind. And on the last day of the 20-day veto period, with 1 hour to go, otherwise it would have been pocket vetoed, he signed the bill. And that's how we came to have full-day kindergarten.
I think he vetoed some other bills that she supported, but that one, or maybe he threatened that and passed that. Well, congratulations, and again, the lives of all the parents and the kids now going to full-day kindergarten is thanks to the effort of Think New Mexico, and thanks to John Gasparich for finding that money.
And Dee Johnson for changing Gary Johnson's mind.
And for Governor Johnson for signing it.
Absolutely.
So, very good.
Yeah.
So, many successes of Think New Mexico. You've been in existence for 25 years as the founder and executive director of this result-oriented think tank. How in the world did you come up with Think New? I love the name Think New Mexico, but how did this think tank come to being and again have such success?
It really grew out of my experience. Before founding Think New Mexico, I worked for Attorney General Tom Udall, and one of the things he campaigned on when he ran for Attorney General was trying to address the DWI problem. And so he had me staff a task force that went around the state, visited different places all over the state, and just asked ordinary New Mexicans what they think we needed to do to address this issue. And out of that, we did a report, much like a Think New Mexico report, and we had 66 recommendations that we put it to 3 comprehensive bills on deterrence, criminal penalties, treatment, and regulating alcohol. And we were able to get those bills through. And in the next 2 years, the DWI fatality rate dropped by 19%, nationally by 1%. So that was pretty heady, and I began to understand what an impact you could make. But the second part of that story was the one bill that we didn't get through in our package was a bill to close drive-up liquor windows. And
Which, let's remind people, they were in existence, what, 30 years ago, 25 years ago?
yes,
Drive-up liquor windows. Tell us a little bit of what the heck was a drive-up liquor. Now we drive up to get our prescriptions at pharmacies. We drive up to get food. We drive up to get our groceries. I mean, drive up for a lot of things now because of COVID. But back then, you drove up.
well, the best way to illustrate this was an AP reporter in Santa Fe drove up to each of the 7 windows that were in
That was
Santa Fe.
very Massey. I
Very
think,
Massey, very good. And 6 of the, he asked for a vodka and ice to go. And 6 of the 7 served it to him.
These were liquor stores that you just drive up and buy something. 6-pack, or in his case, a vodka and ice
To go.
to go.
And so we thought that that was contributing to the problem, and it was. But-
Because why, Fred?
Well, people were drinking alcohol while they were driving with
Okay.
probably one hand.
Okay, thank
And
you.
so-
It wasn't the one hand that was the problem, it was the
The
alcohol.
other-
Okay.
It was actually both.
Okay.
And so we pointed this out.
And for years, I think they tried to close them, but they were why were they so why did they allow them to have here
Well,
in the state of New Mexico?
I think it was the power of this industry, because a lot of these guys were, contributors to the community. They'd pay for the Little League baseball team uniforms and so forth. So the first year, we couldn't even get a single legislator to sponsor the bill. Nobody wanted to touch it.
To close up drive-up liquor windows.
Correct.
Because the industry was so strong.
Very powerful, and they were in everybody's district. There are 325 of these windows. Second year, we got it introduced, couldn't get it out of committee. Third year, got it out of committee. It was very incremental. Finally, in the 5th year, we passed the bill. Unfortunately, the industry sort of hijacked it as it was going through the process, and they added a provision that they would be compensated $100,000 for each window because they said it was a property right.
Oh, that they had this ability to sell, and now this government was taking it away
Right.
from them.
So the governor vetoed the bill because it would have cost about $32 million. And I went to tell my sponsor, who was of the opposite party of the governor, and he was thrilled. And I said, Senator, maybe I misspoke. I meant to say that the governor vetoed your bill. And he said, no, I heard you. Don't you understand? And I said, apparently not.
Because you again, working for the AG,
Right.
wanted these windows closed, and you had a lot of effort to get this done, and then you got it done, and then it was vetoed, yet the sponsor was excited.
Exactly. And
It makes sense to you.
And he said, don't you understand? And I said, apparently not. And he said, but the governor's up for re-election next year. And I said to him, well, I thought we were in this to save lives. He said, oh, no. We can save lives after we defeat the governor. And I remember walking back to tell the Attorney General that the crown jewel of his legislative package had just been vetoed, and the sponsor of the opposite party couldn't be more thrilled.
Because they were going to use it against that governor. Actually, it was Governor Gary Johnson.
Right.
In the election. And you, as an employee, trying to do good, save lives, thought,
It made no sense to me. And that was the first time I thought, we need an organization in this state that will drain the politics out of these issues and put the focus on solutions rather than who's in power and,
how can we get them? How
Yeah.
we can get you. Tell me, but again, Gary Johnson vetoed it because of all the money.
Right. I
That-
think he supported the idea of closing the windows, but he didn't think the state should pay that amount.
Pay
And
$32 million for
And he
that.
was right, because eventually the following year we passed it without the $32 million to the industry.
So you thought, we need an organization that doesn't work to get candidates, get politicians. We need one to get results.
Right, to create sort of a political free zone, and that's why it became a bipartisan organization. A lot of these organizations say, oh, we're nonpartisan, but they're really not. And here we're trying to do it in an intellectually honest way, and the board is really reflective, I think, of the state. We've got Democrats and Republicans. And the remarkable thing is we work by consensus. And when the objective is to solve problems, it's not that hard for Democrats and Republicans to work together. But when the camera's on and when there's an opportunity for theater, sometimes these solutions that we desperately need to improve our state fall by the wayside as a victim of politics. And so this is really an effort to get beyond that and to find common ground and to solve some of these issues.
So you were a state employee working with the Attorney General. What did you do? Quit your job and decided to start this organization? What did you do, Fred? I'm going to just show this little pamphlet, Think New Mexico. This is your logo.
So I worked for Tom Udall for 8 years, and when he got elected to Congress, he was very nice and said, you ought to come with me. But I'd grown up on the East Coast, so I said, been there, done that, but thank you very much. And that's when I started Think New Mexico on January 1st, 1999, which is also my wedding day. And my wife has never forgiven me for the fact that on my wedding day, I wrote a grant proposal. So she's had to put up with a lot.
You got married and started your think tank the same day and wrote a grant proposal. You
Correct.
couldn't wait on the grant proposal a little bit, a couple
Well, I
hours?
realized, it was day one, and I had no source of income, and it was working out of my back bedroom, and which leads to a funny story about what I learned about raising money. I thought what you're supposed to do is just write to the big foundations like the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Brothers, and I kept getting these rejection letters, very thin letters. So finally I got one of them and I said, well, I'll just call them up. And this was the Carnegie Corporation, which is actually a foundation. And I called the program officer that wrote the rejection letter, and he said, oh, no, I remember you. You're a brand new organization, as I recall, and you got to the third step of our process. And I said, well, how many steps were there? He said, 6. I said, well, actually, I don't feel that great about it. Can you tell me what I need to do to get from 3 to 6? And he says, well, as I remember, it was about, your proposal was about full day kindergarten. And he said, it's just not that sexy. And usually I'm good about rejection and I've gone through it a lot, but the words just started tumbling out. And I said, well, I don't remember sexiness being one of your grant, criteria. And he said, it gets worse. He said, well, it's not just that. It's just, New Mexico is sort of out of sync with the rest of the country. And I had his letter in front of me because I was curious, well, where's this guy? And he was in New York City and on Madison Avenue. I grew up in New York City. And I thought, there's no place that's more out of sync with the rest of the country than Madison Avenue and New York City. And he's telling me this in New Mexico. So it was actually a turning point because I quickly ended the conversation and I ended up talking to Owen Lopez, who ran a local foundation. And I told him this story and he said, well, you know what you're doing wrong. And I said, no. He said, well, you're contacting people that don't know you or don't know Think New Mexico. They don't know your track record. You should talk to people you know and trust. So that was a sort of a turning point. I don't think we would have made it 25 years if I hadn't had that conversation with Owen Lopez.
How funny.
Yeah.
Fred, 25 years, like that. You've been a guest on this program many of those years, but that's a blink of an eye. That's a quarter of a century. We've got just a few minutes left. What else would you like to share about the beginnings and what you've run across and who you've run across?
Well, you've covered the gamut here. I just would say to your audience that if they're interested in learning more about us, that I would hope that they would go to our website, which is www.thinknewmexico.org, and learn more about it. I guess the last thing I'd like to say is it's really, and this is not false modesty, Diane. I get more credit than I deserve. I have a phenomenal staff, including Mandy Torres, who I think you're going to have on the show, who's our new education reform director. She's a former 2020 New Mexico Teacher of the Year, and she's been a wonderful addition. Christina Fisher's been with me for 20 years. Really, really bright person. I think she actually has the highest, she graduated from UNM Law School with the highest GPA in the history of that school. But she is just a force and is a terrific researcher and writer, and I don't know where we'd be without her. And Susan Martin, who does all the non-policy work and just keeps the organization running. We've never had an advancement director. We really exist because of the kindness of strangers. And then just a phenomenal board of directors. So we have, I mentioned Gary Carruthers, a former Republican governor. We have a former Democratic Attorney General, Paul Bardicki. The chair of our board is Roberta Cooper-Ramo, the first woman president of the American Bar Association. This always sounds like name dropping, and I think I've made this joke on your show before, but if I don't mention somebody, it turns out they're the ones that are watching, and then I hear about it. So we have Jackie Baca, CEO of Bueno Foods, Nota Begay, the golfer, also a terrific advocate for child nutrition, particularly among the Navajos and other indigenous populations. Edward Lujan, former state party chair of the Republican Party, and owner of the Manuel Lujan agencies. So it's a good group of statesmen and stateswomen, LaDonna Harris from Americans for Indian Opportunity, that really is very representative of the state.
Who all care and love about the state, as you do, as I do, as KCHF does, because we want us to move forward. And Fred, thank you. Congratulations on 25 years here in New Mexico. And the next 25 years, what will it bring? We can find out probably on your website, right?
Well, I hope you'll bring me back the next 25 years. And thank you for the last 25 years and having me on this show. It's been a terrific help. Thank you.
And to find out what you're going to work on, we can look at your website to find out next projects. Run down the next two that we talked about, education reform. In addition to that, what things are you looking for in the future with Think New Mexico?
Well, one thing we've never gotten to the finish line that we'd really like to address is capital outlay reform. And we were able to get a bill through so that they now have to disclose who the sponsors are of these projects. But we'd really like to make it more of a merit-based process to get the money really where it's most urgently needed, as opposed to just allowing people to spend it in their sole discretion for
their pet projects.
Yeah.
That may not have any redeeming value. But Think
Well
New
said.
Mexico. I like I said, I love your title. Think New Mexico. It means so many things. Think, just think New Mexico.
Yeah, some people think it's Think, New Mexico, but it's just Think New Mexico.
Think New Mexico. Fred Nathan, again, congratulations, 25 years, the executive director and the founder of Think New Mexico, the result-oriented think tank that's making a difference in our lives. Thanks for watching the program. And when you go to the grocery store, think about Fred, Nathan, and Think New Mexico. You're not paying any taxes on all that food. Appreciate watching. Have a great week with your family. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Fire threatens everything in its path. When it threatens our communities, we respond. We bring the fight to the front line. The Army National Guard stands ready, because sometimes the front lines are in our own backyard. We will always be there when our community needs us the most. Find out more about serving your community part-time by visiting NationalGuard.com.
Issues and Answers with your host Diane Kinnewater is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program or to purchase a copy of any Issues and Answers program, visit sunbroadcasting.org or call us at 505-345-1991.